Welcome back to Let Us Think About It. I'm Ryder Richards, and today we're going to wrap up our little three-part series on Richard Rorty's Contingency, Irony, and Solidarity, written in 1989. So, as a recap, Step 86, we unpacked Rorty's radical idea of contingency. That is, language, self, and community are tools that we craft, not truths that we find. And we craft these tools because we realize everything is contingent, so we can self-create. We don't have to dig for some sort of universal foundational principle. Now, in Step 87, we dove into Part 2 here, where Rorty's liberal ironist, he juggles private doubts and he kind of pairs it with public hope. And this clashes with the metaphysicians who are chasing universal truths. So today in Step 88, we're going to jump into Part 3, Chapter 7 through 9, where Rorty shifts to cruelty and solidarity. These are core moral concerns for his liberal ironist. And Rorty argues that solidarity here isn't about discovering a shared human essence, some universal truth, but it's about creating it through imaginative identification with others' pain. And this is primarily driven by narratives like novels rather than philosophy. So I don't know if I've done a great job doing this yet, but Rorty's ideas are pretty captivating. He blends wit, literary flair, great logical threads, and I think kind of a hopeful pragmatism that makes you really want to rethink morality itself. And I'm going to share some examples like Nabokov's idea of tingles and Orwell's kind of chilling antagonist O'Brien in 1984. And that shows, I think, why Rorty is so compelling to me. But as always, the show's called Let Us Think About It. I'm skeptical and I'm going to do some critiquing, but we're going to save most of that for the end. And I'm going to kind of argue that his vision might have already come true, but it has been twisted in ways either he didn't foresee or that we didn't read him close enough to forestall. Step 1. Noticing cruelty through narrative. Nabokov's tingles, immortality, and goodness. This is all Chapter 7. So Rorty opens Part 3 with Vladimir Nabokov, particularly Lolita. And this is to show how novels help us notice cruelty in ways that philosophy can't. He argues that narratives, not treatises, drive moral progress by making us see others as one of us, through really detailed depictions of pain and humiliation. So Nabokov's work, especially Barber of Casbim, that sort of episode, it reveals cruelty born of inattention. But Rorty's discussion of Nabokov's pursuit of tingles, immortality, and goodness is, I think, really where Nabokov shines, and Rorty spotlights this. And what Rorty does here is he blends literary insight with moral imagination. So Rorty highlights Nabokov's belief that art, not abstract ideas, achieves immortality by evoking tingles. I've mentioned that word a couple of times, but these are those spine-chilling moments of aesthetic bliss, this kind of emotional overwhelm that can happen. And on pages 151 through 153, Rorty quotes Nabokov's essay, The Art of Literature and Common Sense, where he argues that wonder at trifles is the highest form of consciousness, revealing a world that's good through imagination, not intellect. Nabokov rejects Platonic ideals or mathematical formulas as dead metaphors, that maybe they offer transparency to something, but there's no beauty in there, and therefore how do you change an individual without beauty? Now, as Rorty puts it, art rather than mathematics breaks through the walls of time into a world beyond contingency. Now, this works because Rorty's logic here is poetic yet pragmatic. Nabokov's focus on really vivid, particular, concrete details like something round and creamy, beautifully flushed, captures this kind of memory of goodness. It's kind of an irrational but tangible experience. This is not a universal principle. And he shows here that goodness, the good, it's really not sane, as it's always intangible and incomplete. So the human must perform a mental twist into contingent memories. in order to reference goodness. In order to figure out what it is, you have to remember and then project forward. Now, this resonates because it feels very human. It feels grounded in sensory moments rather than rubrics of valuation. So Rorty admires Nabokov's ironist stance here. Goodness isn't a Kantian imperative, but it's a childishly speculative belief that keeps us moving despite terror, stupidity, and barbed wire. So for Rorty, this narrative-driven goodness motivates us to avoid cruelty, not through logic, not through rules, but through empathy sparked by stories and memories. Nabokov's Lolita shows this pretty darkly. Like Humbert's aesthetic ecstasy, it really blinds him to Dolores's pain. But the novel's details, like the barber's unnoticed grief, this inattention, that forces us to notice, and that makes us less cruel. So Rorty's appeal lies kind of in this pivot where he takes Nabokov's literary obsession with immortality and he spins it into a tool for moral progress, showing how art's tingles can expand our moral imagination. And here, once again, like Rorty's logic is seductive because it celebrates human creativity over rigid systems. He doesn't demand we accept Nabokov's anti-Platonic metaphysics, which he calls a self-consuming artifact. Instead, he praises the ironist's ability to weave beauty and pity into a contingent, hopeful vision. It's kind of like he's saying, forget the universal truths, forget Plato or Kant's dead metaphors, let's tell stories that make us kinder. This actually feels empowering, allowing us to see novels as moral tools, not just entertainment. So, key takeaway from this chapter is Nabokov's narratives teach us to notice cruelty by evoking tingles that link aesthetic bliss to moral empathy. They really show how art's contingent beauty can drive solidarity, sidestepping formulas. Make people good through feeling, not by rules or theory. That's kind of the principle here. Access the intangible good and let that drive your actions. Step 2. The Fragility of Liberal Hope. This is about Orwell's O'Brien in 1984, so this is chapter 8. So, given that we discussed Orwell's 1984 in step 85 when we were talking about the good, I wanted to insert an example here that aligns with Rorty's linguistic contingency that we brought up, a couple episodes ago. Winston, the main character, says at one point, I hate purity. I hate goodness. I don't want any virtue to exist anywhere. I want everyone to be corrupt to the bones. Naturally, given that good and purity as language concepts have been shifted to corrupted party values, shackles really, liberation comes in the form of decimation. To create a new good, Winston must, invent an alternative vocabulary. That's what's necessary for freedom, and that is freedom from usurped language, which is also something we need to pay attention to today. So now, when Rorty turns to George Orwell's 1984 to really underscore the fragility of liberal hope, that's a warning that solidarity depends on historical contingencies. It's not inherent human goodness here. So his analysis of O'Brien, this is the very intelligent torturer, well, it's a good example of his ability to kind of make abstract ideas visceral, right? Orwell does this very well, showing how cruelty can hijack even the gifted-minded. So in chapter 8, Rorty interprets O'Brien as this kind of chilling figure, a curious, cultured intellectual who uses his gifts to torture Winston. And it's not because he lacks some essential humanity, but because historical contingencies allow for it. His ability to empathize, to really know Winston, well, that's an ironist trait. It's not metaphysical. So Rorty writes, intellectual gifts, intelligence, judgment, curiosity, imagination, a taste for beauty, are as malleable as the sexual instinct. So O'Brien's mastery here of doublethink, a highly contingent vocabulary, it lets him serve the party without irony's doubts. Yet Rorty calls him the last ironist in Europe, because he uses ironist-like skills, probing Winston's mind, forming an intense, empathetic conversational bond, but he does all this to break him. it's really psychopathic, weaponized empathy that's going on here. Now, this example, well, it captivates people because it's terrifyingly plausible. And Rorty draws on Orwell's insights that history could empower figures like O'Brien, just as it once empowered liberals like J.S. Mill. Now, the famous 2 + 2 = 5 scene in 1984 isn't, of course, about mathematical truth, but it's about shattering Winston's ability to rationalize himself, to make his beliefs coherent. So, yeah, Rorty's logic here is pretty stark. Nothing guarantees liberal hope's survival, especially when everything's contingent. There's no universal truth or human nature. It's just, quote, small contingent facts. Now, this hits hard because O'Brien feels real. I mean, we've seen intelligent people justify cruelty. I mean, you can probably picture in your head several propagandists and ideologues running around today doing this. So Rorty's appeal here lies in his refusal to sugarcoat this kind of thing. He uses Orwell's narrative to show that solidarity is indeed fragile, urging us to fight for it without metaphysical crutches, without universals. So Rorty's reading of Orwell, it becomes gripping because it blends literary analysis with existential stakes. He doesn't offer easy answers to O'Brien's cruelty, really just a warning that liberal hope depends on us creating narratives that in some way counter such figures. It's a call to action wrapped in a story, and this makes his pragmatic approach feel urgent and human. Now, consider this for a second. We actually need a pragmatic irony to counteract an extreme ironist. Step 3. Creating solidarity. Sellars and narrative expansion. This is in chapter 9. So Rorty tackles solidarity directly, arguing it's not a universal essence, but a contingent creation expanded through narratives that make them into us. His use of Wilfrid Sellars' we intentions, that's a clear example of his ability to ground abstract ideas in practical moral progress. So these aren't really shared goals of a specific group. It's not like we Milanese or we liberals, right? It's not even we humans. Instead, he cites examples of World War II Jews, where the Danes and Italians were much more likely to hide them because they saw them as one of us. These are fellow neighbors, parents, or workers, not because of some universal trait or universal humanity. So solidarity for Rorty grows when we notice similarities in pain and suffering, making differences like race or religion less salient, like acidly dissolving them. So this is grounded here in history, not in dogma. And Rorty points to novels like Uncle Tom's Cabin or Black Boy, which detail suffering to expand us to include the enslaved or marginalized. Now, his logic here, Rorty's logic, is practical. Moral progress happens when narratives make us care about strangers, like a mother in Dakar or maybe a homeless American. He writes, "The right way to take the slogan, 'We have obligations to human beings simply as such,' is as a means of reminding ourselves to keep trying to expand our sense of us as far as we can." This call to action resonates because it's hopeful without being naive, or, another way to angle this is maybe it's intentionally naive, much as goodness is intangible and irrational. But it is logical in that it may be the only way around the metaphysician's formulaic utilitarianism. So stories over abstractions are ubiquitous today, as politics is all about perception and messaging. This is perceived value alignment over something concrete like policy or principles. I mean, sure, any good marketing is going to claim concrete outcomes, but the really particular, singular human story, this is like a moral tragedy or heroic overcoming with a face on it. It's much more compelling, sticky, memorable, and even motivational. So Rorty, via Sellars, he really makes a good case for turning a philosophical concept into a tool for real-world empathy. His focus on narratives makes solidarity somewhat tangible, right? It becomes inviting for us to read, watch, and imagine our way to a bigger we, right? A bigger us. It's philosophy that somehow feels alive, rooted in human experience, not sort of abstract or general principles or universal truths. But, and as you know, this is my caveat, the imagined we, the obligation to humans as such, well, this is also a little bit abstract or kind of imaginary, despite being the goal that we have in mind here. So stories are, of course, a great way to soften prejudice and cruelty sort of preemptively, providing fertile ground for empathy. However, if this kind of abstract them as we is turned into a general principle that we have to follow, a universal empathy, I mean, does it actually turn into one of Rorty's dead metaphors? This kind of common sense statement that has lost its motivating tingle. Step 4. Rorty's legacy. Subversion and capture. Rorty's vision of solidarity through imaginative identification. Well, it's inspiring, right? But 35 years after the book, has it come true? And if so, how has it been subverted? Because this doesn't seem to be the world he was imagining. And I argue that Rorty's ideas have taken root, but have been captured in ways that undermine his liberal hope. So Rorty's liberal ironist, who crafts a private self while publicly fighting cruelty, that's partly come to life. Today, many people embrace self-creation using new vocabularies to redefine gender, identity, or purpose. Think of those proclaiming unique pronouns or personal truths, and these are foundational to who they are. Now, Rorty, I think, would cheer this as private irony enabled by liberal freedom. And publicly, his calls for solidarity through anti-cruelty, it resonates in movements advocating for marginalized groups, from the #MeToo to Black Lives Matter, which all use narratives to expand us. However, and unfortunately, they have also intensified the us-them distinction. They've not made them into us. So that's the twist, right? That these ideas maybe took off, but have somehow been captured or subverted. So Rorty's ironist self-creation assumes individuals are crafting unique vocabularies, which should lead to inimitable traits. But many people claiming uniqueness today, it doesn't feel that unique. It feels mimetic. They are adopting prepackaged identities from online communities or influencers. These aren't the hard work of ironist projects, but off-the-shelf conformist ones, really glomming on to other people's vocabularies for social capital or immunity from criticism. Now, as Rorty warned, solidarity's glue might not hold in a fragmented media landscape. Competing narratives, all these stories amplified by algorithms, they can often deepen the us versus them divides, like polarized politics or cancel culture, where empathy is selective and even suicidal. Even worse is anti-cruelty has been weaponized now. So Rorty's liberal, who fears cruelty above all, inspired calls for public protections like safe spaces or hate speech laws, but these can morph into scapegoating. And groups claiming solidarity oftentimes attack others as not anti-cruel enough or not anti-racist enough. And this reproduces cruelty and unfairness under the guise of justice. And this is no longer imaginatively identifying with the other. So this isn't Rorty's ironist self-becoming, but solidarity captured by performative moralism, where public proclaimed virtues trump private doubts. And Rorty's lack of universal grounding, his metaphysics that he's kind of thrown out here because of contingency, well, it makes his vulnerability clear that without a shared truth, solidarity does depend on narratives which are often hijacked. Now, also we should discuss that his public-private split, it falters when personal identities demand public validation. And this really blurs the line that he was trying to draw here. So in 2025, we see his utopia, right? The freedom to redescribe oneself, but also its shadow, a world where solidarity's rhetoric fuels division, not unity. Choose your redescription wisely, or else. Now, this critique here doesn't dismiss Rorty, but it actually highlights his own warnings throughout the book. Solidarity is contingent. It is fragile. It's open to historical derailment. These things are going to happen with anything that's contingent and always being built along the way. The appeal endures because he equips us to notice this inversion, urging us to keep crafting narratives that expand us despite the risks. So Rorty's solidarity has, I think, partly materialized, but it has also rapidly been subverted by mimetic identities and weaponized anti-cruelty, showing the fragility of this narrative-driven hope. All right, thank you very much for joining me. That wraps up our journey through Rorty's Contingency, Irony, and Solidarity. We've traced contingency from language to selfhood. We've wrestled with the liberal ironist's private-public dance, and also explored how narratives like Nabokov and Orwell's, they really kind of fuel solidarity while warning of cruelty. Now, Rorty's vision, empowering, witty, and human, it challenges us to create a bigger we without universal crutches. But its subversion, it reminds us to all stay very vigilant. I mean, perhaps we actually do need some pragmatic metaphysics to fall back on. Perhaps the ironist, to even exist, needs a stable order in which to develop and grow their new vocabulary. All right, thanks for joining me. I'm Ryder Richards. This is Let Us Think About It. Until next time, keep imagining new vocabularies and questioning them.